Ćao, dobrodošli u Moj Amerika podcast, ja sam Miloš Panić, a moja današnja gošća je Holly Zardus. Ona je ataše za kulturu ambasade SAD-a i osnivačica BOLD programa u Srbiji. Pored više detalja o samom BOLD-u, najviše smo pričali o nastanku i razvoju BOLD programa. Ovaj razgovor je isključivo na engleskom jeziku, tako da upalite prevod i uživajte. Holly, welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Me too as well. So before we start with the BOLD program that you basically created, I would like to get to know you a little better before that.
Sure.
So who is Holly? Where is she coming from?
Yeah. It's actually kind of a long story. Well, because I'm not that young, but no, it's kind of complicated. I didn't come to diplomacy through the regular way. I mean, the United States is really proud of having a diplomatic corps that comes from all walks of life. That's true. That's really true of me. I am from Wyoming, which is if you don't know the United States, it's one of the square states out in the West. It happens to be the least populated state in the United States, so there's not very many people there. And I grew up in a mountain town where we like to ski and climb mountains and be out in nature. And then, it doesn't make any sense, but then I got interested in the world. I got interested in China, actually. So I have a degree in China studies. So I have this mixture of sort of small town and then international interests. And then, I'm skipping a lot of parts, and then I became a high school teacher. Mm-hmm. So I have a master's degree in teaching, and I taught. In the United States, we call it civics. It's basically a course on government, and we actually taught some foreign policy to high school kids, and I loved it. I loved teaching. I loved everything about it. But the way you become a diplomat in the United States is you take a test, and it's open to anyone. It's free. And I took the test, and I passed.
Just like that? Like any
kind of, yeah,
trainings for that?
No, there's no training for the test. It's several parts, so you don't just pass the first part. You have to go through several stages. But basically, it's not that simple, but basically I left teaching and became a diplomat. So there are a few of us in the diplomatic corps who started as teachers. That's a sort of a subset. And those of us who did usually really want to be involved with the public, right? We're not as interested in working with big policy and officials, but working with the public, because that's what you do in a classroom. And at least that's true of me. So what I am, we have different ways, different sort of categories of diplomats in the U.S. Diplomatic Corps. I am a public diplomacy officer. So that is about the public, as opposed to like a political officer or an economic officer. So yeah, it does make some sense. It kind of sounds like I've been all over the map, but I took my international interest and my interest in, human beings,
yeah.
And I hoped to sort of shape that into what I do in diplomacy. And I've been able to do that. I've been able to do that in all the countries I've worked in. So I don't know if you want to know the countries I've worked in, but I can.
Yeah, we can start with that. Yeah, just
sure.
Get to know how did you start and what did you?
Yeah, so I started being a diplomat a little bit later than some. Well, it's not that uncommon, but a lot of people come straight out of university to be a diplomat. I had already had a career as a teacher, and that was late too. So I came in, I can't even remember what age I was, but in my mid-30s. And so I already kind of knew what I wanted. And this is what I wanted. I wanted to be very human-centered and human-focused. And I felt like the State Department had a lot of resources to be able to it sounds super naive, but to make the world a better place. I really believed that was an institution that could help me be a part of that. So yeah, I signed up, and then you kind of get assigned to where you're going to go. There's a little bit of collaboration with like what you want and what the State Department needs. Anyway, it's a complicated process. But my first tour was in the United States, actually, which was a big surprise. I thought I was going to go overseas. And then I went to China, which was not a surprise at all.
Yeah.
And then I went to Indonesia, which was a new country for me, and really fascinating and amazing. It's an amazing country if anybody gets a chance to go. They have something like over 600 languages, and 11,000 inhabited islands. I mean, there's no country like it on Earth.
And then from the Indonesia, everything starts with the Bolt.
That's right. Yeah. So in Indonesia, so that was my first real public diplomacy, like serious public diplomacy job in a foreign country. So it was kind of my first chance to take these interests that I had and sort of see how I could make a difference there. At the same time, right when I got there, the White House at the time had started a program that they called the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative. It's this long name. And the acronym they came up with was kind of clunky, YSEALI, but it works. And the reason I know it works is because everybody there in that part of the world knows it now. But the reason it works is because it's such a good program. It was given to me, or sort of they told me I have to implement it in Indonesia. It was implemented in 10 countries in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, all the countries around that area. So I did it for my team did it for Indonesia from the very beginning. And so it launched in, gosh, what years was that? It was a lifetime ago. But it launched, and then I was there for 3 years. In those 3 years, I mean, Indonesia is a huge country with a big population, right? It went from 0 members to 25,000 members. So,
wow.
Right? I mean, it's that kind of growth. You can see those kind of numbers in Asia, right? But, it was sort of given to me and mandated that I do. And at first, I will admit, I was sort of like, I don't get this and I don't want to do it, like a lot of us are. But not very long into it, I realized the model was really effective at motivating young people to go beyond themselves and work for something bigger and to bring them together. Which, of course, when you bring people together, they can achieve more than they could on their own, right? So it had this multiplying effect. And just the way it was designed, it's not rocket science. It's not like really complicated, but the way it's designed creates this momentum. So I was really convinced that it's a really good way to make a difference, basically. And the youth are who we should be focused on, because also not rocket science, the youth are the next generation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's like something we all know. So I think we need to be serious about empowering them to make the world that we want.
So the program went really well in Indonesia?
It did, yeah. I mean, like with anything, we had fits and starts and, learned a lot of lessons about how to do different things. But it was designed in Washington and like given to us. And so they had lessons learned too, and back and forth with all the 10 countries, But part of it was that all 10 countries worked together on it, which is not that easy, right? Especially the 10 countries of Southeast Asia are almost all different languages. I mean, between the Philippines and Indonesia, you probably have 1,000 languages.
Yeah.
And then Thai and Cambodian, and they're not the same languages at all, right? So the idea was that you could get these young people together to work on projects because they have similar needs and similar desires for the future. And that proved to be overwhelmingly true, right? One thing is that they share an ecosystem. So a lot of it was about preserving coral reefs and jungles and forests that they all have in common. And so they knew about that and could share that kind of information, which is really exciting. But the other thing is they were all the same age and kind of going through life at that time in the world, right? So similar challenges with social media and with globalization and emerging economies in this dynamic environment. I mean, it's funny. It kind of seems like a lifetime ago because it was pre-pandemic, right? Everything's changed since then. But that's true now. Young people now are post-pandemic, and they have that in common, whatever that means, right? So, yeah, so I think everyone was sort of like, can all these countries get together on this? And they could. It was really cool. We had workshops, YSEALI workshops in the different countries, with maybe 75, 80 young people from all the different countries coming together and working together on projects. And it really made you feel like, we're all going to be okay.
Yeah.
the world can get together and
Yeah.
and create solutions.
Yeah, when you see the young people merging together and making this something, you
Yep.
know, it changes the world.
Yeah. I mean, we old people, right? We are always like, oh, the young people have so much energy. And I mean, it's a truism, but that's just it is you do have a lot of energy. And so let's put it to good use, right? We're kind of tired and stuff and old, but we can support you, right? We can give you what you need to.
Yeah, with the knowledge, experience, everything.
That's right. Yeah. No, we can see what needs to be done. And like what I'm doing is I'm using the US government to do this, right? Like I deliberately wanted to work for the State Department because I knew they had a lot of resources to make a difference in the world. And so I wanted to make sure that was done in the best way possible, or what I think is the best way.
Yeah, got you. So when did you move to the Balkans?
Yeah, so then so surprising. I'd spent so much of my earlier part of my life in Asia, I kind of imagined I'd always be there. But as with the State Department, you when it's time to look for your next job, you look at this big list and kind of see what's available. And there were a lot of jobs in Europe available. And I was like, okay. I mean, I'd really never been to Europe, which is so unusual for an American who likes to travel. I'd really spent most of my time in Asia. And I got a job in, I guess, 2018 in Sarajevo. And so I kind of had to look on a map and try to figure out what all these little countries were that jammed together in South Central Europe, and went to Sarajevo. I got trained in the language, which has not taken very well, but it's okay. It's been helpful. But I went to Sarajevo from Indonesia, which if anybody has ever been in those two countries, it's like being on a different planet. I mean, really, really different cultures. Just the climate is completely different. One's tropical, one's Mediterranean, basically Mediterranean and continental. And the people, you Balkan folks are really tall and white,
yeah.
right?
Kind of.
And Indonesians are not known for being tall, and they're not white. And so I was really used to being like the only white person in the room, and all these different things. So it was a really big adjustment, and really fun. I have to say, Sarajevo felt a little bit like home to me because I come from a mountain town where people like to ski and
got you.
And be in the mountains. So it wasn't hard at all to sort of feel comfortable there just physically. I really love Sarajevo. It's such a unique little place. But it introduced me to the Balkans, which I didn't know a ton about, even though we diplomats end up knowing quite a bit about most of the world because we hear about it through different people. But I didn't know a ton and quickly found out that it's an extremely complex place. And I think you really can sort of boil down the complexity of all the Balkans into Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? Unfortunately, it's got like all that complexity in one small country. And it's a steep, as we say, steep learning curve. You get there and you're like, wait, what? 3 presidents? 3 governments? How does this work? And it takes a while to kind of internalize that.
If it works, don't touch it.
Yeah, exactly. But what I saw, so I had this experience in Indonesia, and I really saw that Bosnia, I'll just say Bosnia for shorthand, kind of behaves like a region instead of a country because it has these different tensions with its fragmented system. The Southeast Asia is fragmented because it's 10 different countries. Like they don't actually have to do what the other country says. But in Bosnia, that country needs a little more unity itself. And so that was one goal of Waisili, to see if these people could work together. And I thought, wow, in this country, I think we need to see if people can work together a little bit better. And we had a little more resource, just without getting into the bureaucracy, we had a little more resources there, a little more money, basically, than we would normally have. And I saw an opportunity. So what happened? So the difference, and so we created BOLD, I didn't come up with the name. My colleague in Banja Luka did, and he'll forever be famous for it. But we created it instead of it being handed to us from Washington. And that's the difference, is sort of, this became my project. I had to pitch it to my boss and then the ambassador and had to win their support. And then we had to readjust the budget and get money specifically for this, which meant getting a little more money, and it also meant taking money away from things that we already were doing, which were valuable and good. But there were good reasons to sort of consolidate what we were doing, make it more efficient and streamlined. At least that's the case I made, and I got what I wanted. But the reason I bring that up is because this became my project, whereas before it was my sort of assignment.
Just because it was your project, you just had to, you felt different making it, because then it's something you're making from the scratch, but with experience.
That's right.
And that's the different, when you have to work and then you like when you want to work, it's totally different.
Right. I mean, I started to feel like, let's say not Waisili, but let's say Bold member myself, right? I had a project that I wanted to succeed. And this is what we're encouraging Bold members to do, is to come up with an idea and try to turn it into something that's actually implemented on the ground. And that was my project. My project was to make other projects. It became, so for Bold to succeed in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it had to become the whole embassy's project. So I had to win over, because it needs a lot of resources from the embassy. So I had to win over, like I said, my boss and then the ambassador. And that was, they did. They sent me to a training, and they had to make sure, it's a lot of money, so we have to make sure that it's going to be effective. And they believed that it was, and that it's a good way. What it is, and this has borne out, it's been true, is that it's a really good way to invest in youth. We talk about investing in youth, and the embassies all over the world always have youth programs. But this is like, if you can put it all under one umbrella, we can really put our energy there and really make that a priority to make sure that the youth are getting what they need to be the next generation of leaders. So it became, my project became the embassy's project, and then it became, then the most nerve-wracking part about implementing a project was like, is this going to work? Like, I've put my reputation on the line and our budget on the line, right? And it's U.S. taxpayer money, and so it's not your regular money. It's money that's sort of really sort of sacred.
You were under the pressure.
That's right. Yeah. And and then what does success look like? And this is also something that Bold projects all face. Like, okay, how do I know that this is doing something good? And I will tell you that I'm pretty comfortable not seeing results right away because I was a teacher, right? Teachers don't always know. You know, you have tests and you have papers and you have these ways of assessing students, but sometimes it's hard to really know if they're getting what you're trying to teach them. It's always kind of a mystery. And so you have to be kind of comfortable with that as a teacher. And then they leave. You know, you go through a school year. In the United States, I think here teachers sometimes stay with the students for several years, right? But in the United States, after 1 year, those kids go on, and you're sort of like, I don't know if they learned everything that they needed to learn for the next year. And you get to be pretty comfortable with that. And sometimes you don't see results in those young human beings for decades, right? Sometimes you don't know if they are going to turn out to be okay.
So how did you measure that?
Yeah, so I'd also learned in teaching that you try to measure things that are hard to measure through tests and different things, but you try to monitor, measure, watch, and see if it's working. So with Bold, same thing, right? You have to, so the way Bold works is we have partners. So we grant money to partners that can help us achieve the theme goals, right? So we have 2 themes, economic development and civic engagement, and we have different partners on both sides who really excel at that. They're really good at, on the economic side, they know what it means to start a business. They know what it means to be just to have a business idea and nothing else, and all the obstacles that young entrepreneurs are going to face. And so with that expertise, we rely on them to deliver that product. The product being really education, right? Really training and support and mentoring, like education plus.
Yeah.
And so how do we know? Like, yeah, you can look at the projects that come out. You can look at, like, written on paper. Bold members come out and have a project idea that looks like it's going to work, a business plan, something like that. And then you can see them do it. Like, say they have a launch, or they, a lot of civic engagement members go have a workshop, or go, do a project out with the public somewhere. And you can go to that and see that it's happening. And that's super exciting. And it is happening. But we want more, right? We want longer term goals. We want change. We want a vibrant, participatory democracy that people are all involved in civic engagement, and this vibrant economy. And of course, we can't see that immediately. We have to see little bits and pieces and see if it's on its way, basically.
Yeah.
So we rely on our partners a lot to sort of troubleshoot within the workshop or within the training, and sort of help individuals. And it's really the macro level and the micro level together, which I love. It's really challenging, but I love it. It's kind of like teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have, like, the grants that you, like,
So we give partners money to run. So, and then Bold, what makes Bold work, and I can back up to Waisili. This is the exact. So people say, "Oh, you created Bold." I guess I did, but it's not my idea. I was not a brilliant innovator, I will admit 100%, and which is also a good message for young activists or people who want to make a difference. You don't necessarily have to have a fresh, new, brilliant idea. Lots of brilliant ideas need to be done over and over and over again, like in more places, right? So Waisili was a pretty brilliant idea. I don't know who was responsible for it, but I took it, I stole it, and made it, put it in this part of the world. So, but what makes it work is it has this sort of set of programs that you can tap into as a young person. You can say, "Oh, I want to get some training. I want to," and well, let me back up. It's all about leadership is what it is. So that is a little bit hard to define. What is leadership? What is good leadership? There is also something called bad leadership, right? Someone can lead you off a cliff. Like, that is true, right? So that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for young people who want to lead open, democratic, vibrant, economically sustainable, and prosperous communities. So that kind of leadership has to be outward looking. So not a leader that focuses on themselves and their skills and who they are and getting people to listen to them. There is some of that if you're going to be a leader. But I believe, and I think the U.S. government believes, that democratic leadership means you're outward focused. You're focused on the community and what they need. And then there's this weird balance between you as the leader and the community as this group of people. So how do you know that you have the skills to give them what they want? And you might not in some cases, right? Nobody has it all, right? So you have to pull in partners. You have to pull in people who can help you. That's all part of leadership. You have to listen sometimes and find out that what you thought was the problem isn't exactly right. The problem is more complex or different than you thought, and so the solution is different than you imagined. You have to have that flexibility and that humility to say, "Oh, okay, wrong direction, let's change directions." These are all parts of leadership that you could sit down and, like, teach people about. You could have a little class on what it means to change directions. But I think the better way to do that is through doing. So that's why Bold and Waisili, we're just going to stop talking about Waisili. Yeah. Bold is human and project focused, right? We want young people to work on actually doing something with other human beings so that they learn these lessons. You've got to learn these lessons about how to give people what they want, listen to them, learn from them, and have this back and forth that makes a community. Like, that's what makes a community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's the projects are what drives the whole thing. So we have, if I could draw a picture of like a scaffold of all the different BOLD programs, but at the top, I think, maybe not, but some people think different parts of it are better. But I think the opportunity to go to the United States is pretty great, all fully paid by the U.S. government, and not just go, but like sit down with other people from this region, and then also Americans who have similar goals in mind. Whether it's, because it's the United States and the Balkans, those are two really different places. You have to broaden the focus a little bit. Like, oh, are you working on education? Are you working on the environment? Are you working on human rights? That's something we all work on, like all of those things. Now, the issues might be specific to this place or specific to America, but getting that chance to sort of look at it in another context and really understand it, and then pull back and say, okay, how does this work in my home context, is kind of the magic of exchange. One of the big things we do in public diplomacy is send people across the world, right? From the United States to another country to the United States. And the reason we do that, ever since we started Fulbright or all of these old programs, is because it's kind of magic. It's kind of something amazing. When you're in another context, your mind just opens up a little bit more, and you're open to new ideas, and it's life-changing.
Yeah, so you basically just like, how can I say, pick or find the young leaders from Serbia or like this region here, and then you send them to the USA so they can like study some topics and experience some stuff in the USA so they can implement the solutions or like system here in Serbia or the Balkans. Basically,
yeah. I guess I didn't explain the part about this becoming launched in Serbia too, but
we're gonna go.
We'll get there. Okay. Yeah, basically, yeah. So we have two themes. The two themes are important because that means we have two fellowships in the United States, right? We have a fellowship on civic engagement and a fellowship on economic development. The way you get selected for those programs is by having an idea that you can explain to us. It might even be a project that already is being implemented, but at least an idea that's not just like, I want to, stop climate change. Okay, what are you going to do, right? It needs to be boiled down to what it is, what are the parts of it, how are you going to pay for it, who's going to join with you, like how much have you thought through what you can do to implement this thing in your community. And it usually is community-based. That community could be, like, for instance, you have this podcast, right?
Yeah.
Your community is not just here in Novi Sad, right? It's across the airwaves. So it could be as big as you want it to be. But you do need to define what we're talking about, And and it's great because these people are young. A lot of what they can sort of envision is their immediate community. And that, for us, is one of the most exciting things. When someone, particularly not in Belgrade, nothing against Belgrade, love it, but there's a lot of opportunity and focus, and basically it's a lot going on in Belgrade. While, as we all know, some of these smaller towns all around Serbia that are, P.S., adorable and like lovely places to be, they're lacking some of the innovation and the ideas that are happening in Belgrade. So we are super excited when someone from a smaller place has an idea and, never imagined that someone would support them to do that. But through BOLD, we can support those ideas when they're good and planned out and ready to go. So that's how you get to participate. And so we have, basically competitions. I don't like to say that word really because I don't think of BOLD as competitive at all. It is true. We can't give opportunities to every single person. We would love to. But the point is that it's a network that's collaborative. So there are overlapping goals in the network. A lot of people want to work on the environment. A lot of people want to work on human rights. And they'll find each other, I believe, in the network and be able to amplify their impact over time as the network grows. So, but we do have these competitions twice a year, right, for the civic engagement and the economic development fellowships, as an example.
So like just 2 programs over the year?
No, so that's one example. So we have, so this is where it does get complicated, but it's okay. It's not hard. Academic fellowships are for BOLD members age 18 to 25. Okay, so that we have those 2 competitions a year, and usually we send 10 to 12 folks to the States. And what, different places. So far, civic engagement has been in Nebraska, at the University of Nebraska, where they have an amazing program, and then to New York State. Sometime in New York City, but it's to New York State. So that's that. We also have professional fellowships. So those get a little more complicated because professionals are more complicated. They have jobs and they have to find a way to make that work with what they're doing. And we, through different programs run by the State Department, we place professionals in a workplace in the United States for mentoring, basically. But all of them are project-based. So the academic fellows go to the United States for usually 4 or 5 weeks and work on their project idea. And if it's economic, that's usually a business plan and a pitch, right, to actually start a business. So they come back ready to implement that thing. Now, almost every idea sadly to say, requires money, right? I mean, it is true that there is a way to do some things without a ton of money, but we get it, and we want to be able to support all of them. We can't, but we are happy to, and this is true, we combine our resources with other organizations in Serbia or in the region, people who are granting money, other opportunities we'll announce, and then BOLD has its own grant competition every year. It's nowhere near close enough to fund all of the ideas, but it's a way to tap in. So that's coming up, actually. The grant competition will be announced, I think, in the next week or 2.
The BOLD has its own grant?
Its own grant.
$5,000 to $10,000?
$10,000 max, yeah. And
how many participants can actually receive that grant?
Yeah, well, it depends on how much they ask for.
Is it like $5,000 to $10,000 per project or
per
like
project.
Total? Okay.
Per project, yeah. So last
it can
year,
be multiple projects?
Yeah, last year we gave 10 grants, right? They were different amounts, but we don't exactly, we don't have a ceiling on that, just per grant we do. So that's our way of being able to fund some of these ideas, right? We don't want to not have the ideas keep coming, right? But that's a big way to support. There's fellowships, academic and professional, and then there's the grant competition, and there are also workshops, also on the 2 themes, economic development, civic engagement, and they're in country. And the workshops it's really exciting this year. They have been with regional participation. So as you know, Bosnia already has the program. They launched, I should say, because I was there, we launched in 2019, sorry, I got there in 2019 in December, and then the pandemic hit,
Unfortunately,
yeah. So we were all ready to go, and we actually made selections for academic fellowships and all these things, and then they couldn't travel. So it was a little tough to sort of imagine how this was going to play out. But it survived. It survived the pandemic. And in fact, it's a big credit to some of our partners who selected the first year of participants and then went ahead and selected the second year because the pandemic extended, and then said, okay, well, we'll take both groups at the same time, right? So that first year was a big year where they all traveled together. And so that was great. We got to be able to see that. I actually didn't. I left Bosnia and happily, amazingly, went to Serbia, just across the border, which doesn't happen all that often, but I was able to go straight to Belgrade. And now, after that, I had the experience of launching this project and learning how to rearrange the budget and get the permissions and all these things. So I was able to do it much more quickly in Serbia. I also had to win over my supervisor and the ambassador and all the things, but With the Bosnia program already going, we had some pretty good evidence that it was motivating people. I mean, the pandemic was really hard on everybody for all the reasons, but it was a little hard to say we have all these projects because people hadn't had a chance to really start. There were some, but not as many as there would have been. But so we were able to still launch Serbia, Bold Serbia, and now together the two countries are really, I mean, there are lots of really cool projects happening, and young people who are seeing this as a way, like sort of an alternative way to add something to their life, I think. You know, it's not the traditional way of just going to school, maybe traveling a little bit, and then, you know, finding this mysterious job that you don't know what it is. Doing something like this, like just trying to do something in your community, separate from school, separate from job, I think really helps you understand what you have to offer as a human being, right? And it can help you see how to make that all come together. And I don't have that answer, obviously, but I think more opportunities is better and help people see there are more possibilities than they might have imagined. And that is what leads to really positive change. When people can say, oh, I can make a difference. I know because I did this one time. Maybe they just did their project. That was it. And they had that success and they feel like, oh, great. And then they take that down the road further and say, oh, I know what it's like to try to do something and get people to pay attention to you. Or maybe they start their project and they're passionate about it and it's hard and it runs into obstacles, but they keep pushing at it for years and years because it really matters to them. That's another type of leadership that's really tenacious and you push through, and maybe it determines what your profession is or what you do. Either way, it's leadership. It's positive leadership. So we're seeing the beginnings of that in both of the countries. Also, Montenegro has sent participants to academic fellowships. So that's really cool, too. They've been able to send some to the United States without having their own sort of network and whatnot. They don't have all the parts of it. But it's really great to get folks from the region involved. And that's why the workshops are exciting, because the workshops happen here, but we've been able to bring in a number of Bosnians and Montenegrins to one set of workshops, and then there was just another set of workshops where folks from Kosovo and North Macedonia and Serbia all came together and had their workshop in Ohrid. Two of those just happened down there. So Waisili, so this gets into U.S. State Department bureaucracy, a place really no one wants to go. But I'll explain that with Waisili, Washington said, okay, you 10 countries do this and work together, right? That's not how this has happened. This has happened one country at a time. And as the neighboring embassies sort of see this impact on youth, they're interested. But we don't have the bureaucracy all fixed, basically, to make it one program. We're trying to, but it's going to take a little bit of time. But it could very well be all of the Western Balkans together in a program.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it'll be cool.
How do you find the leaders?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is Bold has a low bar for entry. Anybody can enter who's the right age group, 18 to 35, right? So you might be saying to yourself, you're looking for leaders, like why would you make the bar so low? And I think that's because, like I said before, leadership is a little bit hard to identify when someone's young and also to define. People have different ways of doing it. And so I don't know that we can be a good judge of like, oh, you're going to be a good leader, you're going to be a good leader. I think that is something that can happen surprisingly sometimes and over time. So I think a good indicator is if somebody's curious about it. First off, just like, leadership. Yeah, maybe that's for me. Or what do they mean by leader? Anything. Curious about it. Or maybe people actually do feel like they're a leader. They've had some leadership experience when they're young and they're like, yeah, I liked being in charge. I liked sort of having ideas and working with a team, and I want to do more of that. Fantastic. Or maybe people are not even thinking about leadership, but they want to do something specific. That clicks for them that, oh, this is a place to get resources to start that podcast I've been wanting to start.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, and we want that too. That's someone who's already leading and just needs the resources to sort of get there. So that's why it's wide open to membership. But to get the prizes, to get the opportunities that Bold offers, that is competitive. And so we look at, and every single application, well, the application form is always the same. And it is always this idea of what's your project and how are you going to do it and how are you going to make a difference. And that's always a challenge. That I think anybody who works on a project has to define that. With business people, it's called the pitch, right? And you learn how to encapsulate your idea in a very short period of time and just a few sentences that's impactful, that says, this is going to be something you want to invest in. That's essentially what we're looking for. We give you a little more time than that. We give you a little more pages. But yeah, and our application form actually really has instructions. There's a form and then instructions about how to do it. Those instructions really tell you how to do it. They say, you have to define your audience. And if this is your audience, how do we know that you have access to them, right? If you say you're going to go talk to people over the age of 65 all over Serbia, it's like, well, how? Do you have access to those people? Tell us. If you want to, have a big goal, well, this is something we talk about a lot, like the big goal and then the smaller objectives. Your big goal might be like more democratic Serbia. Okay, that's a big goal. That's great. It's great to have a big goal. That might be what motivates you. But your objectives are going to be workshops on what democracy means and civic engagement, getting youth involved in their communities, right? That's something that's like measurable, and you can say this had this result. And in the end, we think it's going to result in this big goal. So those are just examples. But the application form takes you through all those steps and really helps you. If you pay attention to it, it really helps your mind be logical and explain to us how you're going to make a difference. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to make a difference, and it's hard to explain how you're going to make a difference. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For example, I started this podcast as MVP project, like minimal valuable project, like the product.
Right.
So it took me like a while to find the cameras and find the microphones or whatever, and then I started to see the problems with audio and the video and this and that and the lights and the, everything, and then you see, and then when you get to the problem, you just get over it. But then you try to push it and push it and push it, and then like it grows. For example, I have a plan for this podcast to make it a big thing. For example, so it can go to the mainstream.
Yeah.
But I broke it down to the levels and some like how can I say, the bricks or whatever, like the little things, the little milestones, so I can make it bigger. So I can see that what you're talking about is I can like apply that for my project here.
Exactly. Yeah. That is sort of advanced steps in leadership or beyond beginning, because, and this is, I've heard from Balkan people, so this is not a criticism of Balkan people from an American. This is what Balkan people have told me. There's a fear of failure in this part of the world, and people don't want to jump in and take that chance if they don't know they're going to succeed. They want a surety that they'll succeed, and so that then they can be proud of what they did. I mean, who doesn't? I want that too, but that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You have to. So this is something Bold tries to encourage, is risk taking, which maybe a lot of young parents are listening to me, or parents of young people are listening to me going, what are you doing? Telling my child to take risks. Stop talking. Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but you're young, and the reason we're here, that support is such a big part of this program. We're here to support you. I mean, if you win a grant, we're giving you money, right? You're not losing money. We're giving you money to try something that might fail. And we know that. We know that it might. We're going to do everything we can to make it a success. We're going to give you mentoring, and we're going to review your application and say, yeah, this looks like it's pretty well thought out, looks smart to us, go for it. And if it falls flat and totally fails, that's actually fine with us. I mean, yeah, we want it to succeed, but it's actually fine with us. We're not going to ask for our money back.
Yeah, got you. So all of the grants that you give, you don't ask anything back.
Absolutely
if it fails.
No, and the point is trying, actually. If our goal is leadership, I mean, sure, that is the goal. The other goals are great too, like your actual goals, right? To start a podcast, to do an environmental project. Like, we want those to succeed because they're fantastic, right? But they don't always succeed, and we know that. But what our big goal, so my project's big goal, is a generation of leaders, right? And that can happen even if your projects don't succeed. So, I mean, a real leader learns from those failures and starts again. So that's true. I think there will always be project success somewhere along the line with real leaders. I mean, there will be people who start and fail and give up. That's true. That's too bad.
Yeah, understand.
Right? Yeah.
We basically, like, in Serbia, for example, we just like we were growing up with all that, how can I say, the parents and the people around you, like, saying you, like, stay safe, find a safe job, and like, and then, like, that fear, you just like growing up with this.
Yeah.
And then, like, people are scared to take a risk.
Yeah. No, that's
but then, like, about taking risk, you're not gonna take a risk, try to something, but if it fails, it's gonna be, like, terrible. No, like, try to how can I say, calculate.
Yeah.
If it fails, how much is gonna hurt you? It's gonna be money, whatever, like connections, something else. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We Americans it's really different, and I understand that. A really different culture.
So much different.
Yeah, right. I mean, our whole culture is kind of, America is an experiment. The whole idea of the country was like, let's go, let's see if we can do this crazy thing, right? So that's kind of who we are. And I'm proud of that. I mean, it has its problems too, but it is fun to bring that idea to other cultures. And the success of America, the successes that we've had, I think are enticing to people. They're like, oh, yeah, that country that didn't exist 200 years ago, 250 years ago, is now, people are paying attention, So I think it is appealing to something around the world. Like, there's that risk-taking and just give it a try attitude, I think, is appealing to a lot of people. I'm not encouraging just be reckless and dangerous, obviously. Like, that's not the point here. The point, I think, though, is to not be fearful. And I understand your parents or the generation before them saying, be safe. Don't do anything crazy. Just be safe and sort of normal. I mean, the world can seem like a dangerous place, and it can be a dangerous place sometimes. My fundamental belief is that the core foundation of BOLD is that you young people in the Balkans, have the capacity to make the communities you want to see, shape it in the way that you want it to be. Who else is going to do it? You have to do it. And I believe you have the power to do that. To do that, you have to take some chances. And I firmly believe that by taking those positive chances, by saying, okay, I feel a little bit afraid, but I'm going to trust. I'm going to trust a little bit, and I'm going to try a little bit, and let's see what happens. And guess what? The more you trust and it works, and someone else trusts you back, the more safe it becomes. Like, that's how you create the safety that you're looking for. Can it backfire and someone can wreck it? Yeah. Ruining stuff is so easy.
It's super easy.
It's super easy, and it can happen fast. But I don't see an alternative to that. The people who want to sort of ruin society and not have it be vibrant and open need to be pushed against by positivity. And so, I mean, again, I sound sort of naive, but I really don't see an alternative. I've never had a good explanation why we should not be working for positive change. The alternative is don't work for positive change or work for negative change.
No.
Neither of those are convincing to me. And even though working for positive change can be really hard and depressing, right? When it doesn't work. Like, I get it. I still don't see an alternative. So that's why it takes leaders who push through the depressing parts. And like your enterprise here, you ran into struggles, obstacles.
Yeah, so many obstacles.
So many, I'm sure. Everybody does. Like, I didn't know I needed this piece of equipment. I didn't know I needed a permit. I didn't know I had to do this. And how am I going to do it? I can't do it, right? Sometimes you find a way. Almost always, actually, you find a way.
And that's like the best thing, because then you like grow up with the project.
Right.
You want to make something big, but you start small, and then you're trying to build it up, and like the project is growing, but you're also growing with the project as well.
Yep. Right, and you feel so proud of it.
Yeah, like like you didn't know, for example, that you're gonna see this obstacle, that obstacle, the problem, the issue, the whatever.
Yeah.
But then like when you get over it, then you feel proud because you made it, but you couldn't make it because, you couldn't make it. How can I say, until you wanted to make it.
Yeah.
Like, how can I say,
no, that's right. You had to have it. So, and if someone came to you and said, "Wow, you have this podcast. I want to do that, but I don't think I can," you'd have all kinds of things to say to them. Right? You have all this advice, right? And that is how it grows. Like, that's how this positivity grows, and an environment of innovation and risk-taking. That scary, scary word, risk-taking.
Yeah, in Serbia especially, risk-taking is so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying jump off a cliff. Like, those are risks too. I'm saying use some American taxpayer money to try something that might fail, right? It's not that big of a risk.
I love that like people in USA are mostly open to make something tomorrow. For example, last year in the Block Island, I met a guy. He was like younger than me, so he was like 21 or 20, for example. And he was like, I'm going to make a coffee shop. He did. He made it.
He did?
Yeah. Like, because he used to work in that coffee shop.
Yeah.
And the owner wanted to sell it, and he was like, I'm going to buy it. And he was like 20 years old. Like, how can you, for some people in Serbia or in the Balkans, it's like impossible, like to make something like that. So you can see a young entrepreneur at the age of 20, like making his own coffee shop. So I also like saw him in the middle of the summer or during the summer or throughout the summer. So how he struggled with some other things, for example, like you didn't know that if you order this cup, it's not gonna fit with this lid, for example, and that's a problem because then you have to sell it for the customer. The customer gotta pay for that, and it's expensive because it's island. It's like northeast in New England,
it's isolated.
For example. So you can like see all of that struggles, but it makes him stronger and better for the future, for the tomorrow. So tomorrow he's gonna calculate more about this, and this, and then it's gonna be better. So I love that, like how people are like so open to fail. Like
it's true.
That's not so much here in Serbia.
Yeah, we kind of wear it like a badge of honor. Our failures. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's. We talk about failing up, right? Like this is something that is a phrase, like fail, and think about the greatest inventors, like all inventors, but I can think of Americans like Thomas Edison, right? Failed and failed, but he was obsessed with this idea. And obsession helps too, right? Like, you really care and you really are into it, and you'll keep trying and trying.
Especially like when you believe in something that can be possible, and like maybe if it sounds like it cannot be made up, whatever.
Right.
Yeah. So what I want to say is like you believe in something, and most of the people around you, like your family, doesn't support you because they don't believe, but you don't see the results at the moment, and that's where the people usually like stop. If I don't see the results when I'm trying to make something, if I don't see it, I'm gonna quit. No, like look it for the longer term, and that's what also leaders have. Like you look at something for the long term.
Yeah.
And then you can basically calculate if it's gonna turn out good or bad or like fail.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And sometimes it takes a long time. Like that's something I also want. I mean, I want to be very open about this. Failure is a big possibility. It taking way longer than you imagined is a possibility. Like all of these things are hard. And that's what leadership is, doing hard things, right? We don't want leaders who are like, I'm only going to do it if it's easy.
No, right? No, especially.
It's not going to work, right? So we need people who are willing, and I believe vision is important. Like that's why I keep talking about this big goal. If you are passionate about, the environment's a good example, like the climate change, because it's enormous. It's this huge problem that we all face and terrifying on top of it, right? Like it's all these things. But if you're passionate about that, it will motivate you to do these small things, even though you'll feel like this isn't really making, we're not saving the planet yet, right? But if you don't do those, we're never going to, right? So leaders can kind of see through that gap of I'm not seeing results, but I believe there will be, and I think the only way you can stick with that is if your vision is really sort of, positive and universal enough. I mean, not everybody agrees on anything, but really most people, I think we all agree that we want a planet to live on.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe we don't all agree on the solutions, but if you think, and I know, I actually know young leaders now all over the world who have a really great idea and then they just feel like, people don't get it. People are not, they're not seeing what I see. And that's really hard. But they stick with it because they're like, no, I think when they see it, and so the troubleshooting becomes, how do I help them see it better? Right? And so then they have to look and re-examine how they're doing the message. A great example I can think of, just popped into my head, is in Waisili. There was this great woman who was she deaf herself? I can't even remember. She knew sign language and was involved with the deaf community. And they were really underserved and struggled in that part of Indonesia. And she wanted to open a cafe run by the deaf. And it was really hard to get support. I mean, people liked her and they were like, oh, that's cute, right? Great idea that you like those people. This link between like, will you invest in my idea to actually make a difference for these people? It took a long time to get someone to cross that hurdle, to give her some money basically, right? And like a place and all this different kind of support. And they didn't see results. So those people had to take some risks too, right? So she had to be convincing. And through all of that, many, many times, she's just like, this is such an obvious need. We have these people who are suffering. It's so obvious. And that's, I think, how most people feel about problems in the world, right? But leaders stick with it and don't just, what you can do is sort of start, hate's a strong word, but like sort of hate people who don't support you. Like, you don't get it, I'm done with you. No, they go, okay, let me help you understand this better. When these people are empowered, it's going to make our whole community better. I promise you, right? And she, of course, the end of the story is she opened this fantastic cafe that's changing that whole community. Not just the deaf, but all the people who come and see these people and learn sign language. The whole thing.
So you find the problem and then try to make a solution.
That's right.
Find that solution and try to make it a better place.
Basically, right? Yeah. It's not rocket science, but it is really hard.
So in the beginning you said like something about the brilliant ideas. Like you don't have to look for the ideas. Like try to look for the problem that exists.
That's right.
That needs to be solved, and so you'll get to that.
Yeah, I think that's the better way. Actually, I think if someone goes in and says, oh, I want to be a leader, I need to come up with a great idea. chances are that's not the kind of leader you want, right? They just want to be the leader.
No,
right?
That's so much.
Right?
Nah.
Yeah. But if you have someone who says, oh, I care about this issue so much, oh, maybe I should try to do something about it. And then they take those steps. I think that's the better way.
Yeah. I have a story for you. So back in 2019, when I was in Ocean City, Maryland, I remember that I saw on a video on YouTube a video where the guy from Florida, I think so, or he was something was about the Florida. He was like staying in hotels mostly throughout the year. Like he has a home, whatever, but because of the work and job and whatever,
all over the place,
all over the USA.
Yeah.
And he saw the problem that is, no matter if you stay 1 day or 10 days in a hotel, you're gonna use the one soap.
Okay.
For example.
No, that's right.
So for the more days, it's not a problem. But for the 1 day, you just like use the soap once, like basically just like wash your hands once, for example, and then you gotta throw it out in the trash. And he saw the problem. And what he did, he was like asking the hotels to if they can like work with him, like and try not to throw out the soaps, for example, in the trash, but to collect them. And what he did, he actually convinced some hotels, let's say Hilton, Hyatt, whatever, Marriott, and they actually donated him those used soaps. So what he did, he just like made it recycled.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if he did. I think he didn't sell it, and or he donated all those soaps to some communities. But I was thinking about Serbia and try to do the same thing here, but not to donate the soaps, but to sell them and try to, how can I say, all that money that basically you earn with the sales of those soaps. Sorry. So you can like donate that money to some charities for, I don't know, like building some people homes, for example, or something like that. So how, let's say,
awesome.
Let's look for that idea.
Yeah.
How does it sounds for the Bold?
Yeah, that's fantastic. That brings up something that we talk about a lot. So I mentioned the two themes, economic development and civic engagement, like they're two separate worlds. The reason it's great to have two is that we get to send people on both, more people, right? But the truth is civic engagement and economic development should overlap a lot. And that's usually called social entrepreneurship, right? And that's exactly what you're describing there, right? Like a project where its origin is creating a social or solving a social problem, creating a social good, but you're also looking at a way to maybe make some money so that you can keep the thing going, right? So I think that another good reason to have the two categories is you have kind of different people who are more inclined to one or the other. There are some people who are really business minded and have always wanted to be a business owner or something, and frankly, or want to make money. That's nothing wrong with that. But Bold wants those people to start seeing themselves as leaders. And like if you start an enterprise and make a bunch of money or make a little bit of money or whatever, have some success, in Serbia, that is unusual enough that you should really see yourself as a leader and you should really contribute to the community through that. If you're a person who's just sort of like a person who wants to do good and fix the soap problem, for instance, great. But a lot of those people run into the problem of sustainability because they're not business minded. So they have to, if they want it to last, they have to somehow find a way to have it make revenue so that they can keep the project going. So really these two things need to come together, I think, I mean, that's the definition of like problem solving, right?
Yeah.
It's really exciting.
So can this idea like go through the Bold, for example?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. That's a fantastic
For example, if I did that, I would just like make sure to, how can I say, I will not like, how can I say, earn any money out of it.
Right.
I would just like pay the things that I have to pay, for example, the recycling process, the people, whatever, you know, and then like, because I was thinking, if you, for example, donate the pack of soaps, for example, to some families, it doesn't have that much of a value.
Right.
The more value that you can bring is basically sell that, make the money, let's say, and that invest or give that money to the charity, or like make some programs out of it. So let's say you can like educate the people from like rural areas. I'm sorry.
Great.
Yeah. For example, for that, or like build some people homes, or like
totally.
Basically not to earn any money out of it, but to keep the system going. Yeah. So we can like for the future make the better community.
Absolutely. And I can also see, I mean, I don't know about how to do that, but I don't think it's that hard to recycle soap. I'm not sure what the science is behind it.
Yeah, but I would say not so hard.
Not so hard, right? So what could happen is a charity itself could start doing it themselves to generate their own, right? Like that's what they dream of, so that they don't have to keep asking for money from governments and other things. So help, like this kind of way to generate revenue to help for the better good of society is kind of the ultimate project that I think is really what we're looking for.
Is there like any, for example, a remarkable project that somebody applied to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have great Bosnian examples. I have a few because of the pandemic, right? We didn't get to see the results. And then it's still a little new in Serbia, but we have seen, some of our grantees have some really cool ideas. Indonesia, I was able to see, and now I've heard of some things. This is an example I give a lot because it was so amazing. You might know what microloaning is, like microloans.
Yeah, I think I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has an origin with some economics professor somewhere who implemented it in India for the first time, maybe decades ago. It's not a new idea. But a young Waisili member in Indonesia was working in a bank. And Indonesia is sort of like, it's the only way, it's like Serbia, is that the population is concentrated in the capital, in Jakarta, right? So everybody's in Belgrade here. Everybody's in Jakarta there. And in Jakarta, it's like nice. Like young people are working and have disposable income to buy clothes and drink coffee and do what they do, which is not true in a lot of the rest of the country. And so there's this young Waisili member who worked in a bank, and he was giving out loans to people who had credit. And he said to himself, this is a poor country, and there are literally millions of people who don't have credit. Like they don't have access to these resources, and so they can never rise above just subsistence level. So he came up with his Waisili project, and he identified a community that he knew that had like all these women, mostly women, working hard like women do in their homes as housewives, working, but doing tons of work that's not generating revenue. So he got his friends. This is a great project. I mean, it's the microloan idea. He got his friends in Jakarta to give him tiny amounts of money. I mean, literally like maybe $25 or $50 to invest in a woman in this village, right? To help her start her enterprise. And then he went there and trained these women about like managing money and like, okay, you're going to have this income from these people. What are you going to invest it in? What could you do? And these women were already doing stuff. Like one, she goes and catches fish for her family. He's like, well, what if you caught more fish and sold it at the market, right? Or a woman was like sewing. She's this great seamstress, and people would bring her work and she would sew it for them. But what if she expanded, right? So they got these very small loans to just start expanding and creating these little businesses. He did it for 2 or 3 years, and every woman paid their loans back 100% and on time.
Wow.
Every single one. And it was like 3,000 women. This is Asia, right? These huge numbers. But they all paid them back. And his friends who like took some money out of their coffee budget or whatever were like, oh, great. And they got interest, right? And they're like, oh, I gave $75. I got $100 back. Like, yeah. Well, great.
Wow, that's like so inspiring too.
Yeah. And these women created enterprises. The seamstress, the woman she was sewing baby clothes, she ended up hiring like 10 people and bought sewing machines, and they sell the products online to markets in Africa.
Wow.
So this one person, transformed the economy of this village that prior to that was poor and not going anywhere. And now they had money to send their kids to school, and I mean it transformed the village to the extent that the Indonesian government were like, what's going on here? And they hired him in the government to,
wow, that is the true.
It's a really great example. But the truth is, it came from a really honest place. He just was, people with credit are getting all the money. People without credit are left behind. How can I fix that? Right?
Yeah, that's the long-term project.
Yep.
Long-term solution to make the long-term problem, and you can make the solution.
Yep.
Then you break it down and you try to get first the friends to ask them for the money. Then you ask the women for that. Then you try to. That is the pure project.
Yeah. He ran into all kinds of troubles. Training the women was super challenging. Getting them to commit and understand what he's saying. They're not entrepreneurs, but he was turning them into entrepreneurs, right? It was hard.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah. And so the ones who were really successful had that in them. I think some stopped doing it, but for a short period of time, they all were doing it. And just sort of figuring out how to manage the money coming in. I mean, it took a lot, but huge success. In fact, he still inspires me. And I'm just if you ever think that one person can't make a difference, you're wrong. We human beings have something in us that is, no, one person can't do it on their own, ever, right? But one person can plant a seed that turns into something great.
Yeah.
That's how it
totally
happens.
Possible, yeah.
Yeah.
So every once in a while, there's going to be on a website.
Yeah.
It's going to be the application for some kind of the program or the grant.
That's
once a year, yeah?
Yeah, and we don't have a regular schedule. I think right now we have the Professional Fellowship Program is taking applications. So for people 25 to 35, I think. And I know the BOLD grant, that's annual. So that's a one-time a year opportunity is coming right up. And then the great thing about BOLD, and I guess this is maybe the last point to make, is that it'll keep going, right? So if you don't get selected one time for one of the things, again, failure is good news, right?
Yeah.
Learn from that, improve your project, and talk to other BOLD members. I mean, this is really a network that is meant to be supportive. The U.S. Embassy can be as supportive as we can try to be as supportive as we can, but we are limited in our ability. One of the things we're really limited in is we're not as big of experts on the environment here as you all are, right? And this is regional. This is not just in Serbia, but you all come from similar societies, similar economic systems, similar government systems, and you know some of those systemic obstacles that you'll run into, right? So the network needs to, and this is part of that trust. Reach out, talk to people, ask them, share information. There's no harm. It's not like if you have a successful enterprise, someone else can't. No, you both can. Right? That's the point. We want this to be a generation of people who see the possibilities and turn the Balkans into what I see every day, which is this amazing region that, I don't know, people are leaving, and I want to stay. I can't. I have to go back to Washington in a few months. I want to stay because I love it here. It's a beautiful part of the world. There's incredible food. There are all these villages that are so adorable all over. It should be a thriving, vibrant part of the world that everyone, and it's sort of new, right? It's old, but a lot of people don't know about it. It should be opening up and hopping.
And how is gonna BOLD look like when you leave? Because you basically made it.
I did, but it's not about me at all. BOLD is not about me. It's been built into the system. It's thriving in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it's in our system here. And like I said, we're hoping to expand it really institutionally in the bordering countries. What it depends on State Department bureaucracy and how we make that work, but we're going to make it work.
Holly, thank you for coming up for the podcast. I really did enjoy this inspiring story about, first of all, your journey from USA to Asia and then then in the middle, like in the Europe.
Yeah.
And all of this information about the bolo are going to be useful for the future participants. So thank you for coming up, and I really did enjoy.
Well, it has been my pleasure. This is really great. In fact, I'm the one who's inspired here. You're doing something that's unique, and it's a leadership project. So people should take note. Audience, take note. This is the kind of thing that you can do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.